I woke up to news that Brittany Griner got released from prison and she was on a plane on her way home to the US. Apparently the US and Russian government came to an agreement where she would be released in a one-for-one prisoner swap with the Lord of War, Victor Bout. This is trifling, bruh. I'm disgusted. My skin is crawling. So Brittany Griner was convicted of drug possession and sentenced to 9 years in Russian prison after being caught with 2 vape cartridges at Moscow International Airport. Due to the misinformed outcry and just outright propaganda that Brittany Griner rights were violated, the US allowed themselves to fold under pressure and get their anal cavities railed in this prisoner swap negotiation. Like, bruh, we gave him Victor Bout, the Lord of War. Like, this dude is responsible for millions of deaths worldwide. He was actively in the process of giving Colombian terrorists frack, military arsenals, fighter jets, and a lot of other tools that they were going to use to wipe out U.S. military personnel and federal officers who was on ground in Colombia fighting the war on drugs. Have you ever seen a picture of a child soldier with these AK-47s with the switches and these fighter jets and these cargo planes? Well, they got that from Victor Bout, aka the God of War. He was also convicted of giving Charles Taylor's and his rebels a lot of weapons and cargo planes and guns to take over Liberia in exchange for blood diamonds. And he was also convicted of doing this in many other African nations as well. Even after all I just listed, the prisoner swap would have still been digestible if Brittany Griner rights were indeed violated, which they weren't, and I'm going to prove why they weren't violated. And if we would have gotten back in return Paul Whelan, which I believe should be our #1 priority, because this man is a Marine. He actually fought for this country, and he has been detained in Russia longer than Brittany Griner, and he's being detained unjustly. See, Brittany Griner rights were not violated. Some might argue she got a break and she got let off easy. You see, Brittany Griner was convicted under Article 228 of Russian Criminal Code. This bans all possessions of narcotics, including cannabis. There's a law under Article 228 called narco propaganda, where you get jail time for even talking about drugs in a positive light, for even making a joke about drugs in a positive light. There's no nuanced conversation happening in Russia right now about whether or not the war on drugs is good or bad, bruh. They have been dedicated to making sure that drug culture is not a thing in Russia. Article 228 break down the punishment for possession under 3 categories: small-scale possession, large-scale possession, and extra-large-scale possession. So for small possession, you get up to 3 years in prison, large-scale possession up to 10 years in prison, and super large-scale possession up to 50 years in prison. But here's the thing, how they define it is quite arbitrary. So a small-scale possession is simply any form you have, right? Whether it's a gram, a half a gram, whatever. If you have any form of possession, you get up to 3 years in prison. A large-scale possession is a little bit trickier. It's being defined as exceeding the average one-time consumption dose by 10 or more times. So Brittany Griner had 2 vape cartridges on her at a Moscow International Airport. One can argue that a vape dose is just 1 inhale or 1 puff. So if you have 2 vape cartridges on you, that definitely would exceed more than 10 dosage. Some might even argue that that exceeds the especially large scale, which defines it by 50 and more times, right? By 50 or more dosage. Whether or not you want to have the conversation of whether or not this was just or fair, that's not a conversation that should be had, because us as Americans, especially Americans, man, we're arrogant and pompous enough to think that we define what justice is, right? We have a monopoly on what's right and justice, right? That only we know what civil rights should be. No, that's not the case. These people have their laws, and if you break their laws, they can punish you based on their laws. And that's what happened with Brittany Griner. Even if you want to argue that Brittany Griner deserved to come home, okay, I will concede this. But what I won't concede is Brittany Griner skipping the line. There are currently thousands of American citizens right now serving time in Russian penal codes and prisons for the exact same conviction that Brittany Griner got convicted of. But they not coming home. No, you know why? Because they're not celebrities. Us as Americans, we have this unhealthy obsession with celebrities, and I don't get it. The average American citizen who's been in prison right now, way before Brittany Griner, and will probably be there for years after Brittany Griner, their lives matter too. They should come home first. I don't believe that we should figure out who come home first based on their celebrity status. Everybody's lives matter. And if we have came to the conclusion that, yo, this is an unfair injustice and that Americans should be coming home for these, I guess, marijuana convictions in Russia, then we should start with the first person that got convicted and work our way down. Celebrity status should play no role in who come home first. And if we are granting hierarchy and granting special status to certain people to come home first, then why not grant the hierarchy and special status to a former Marine who fought for this country, in Paul Whelan, who was sentenced to a 16-year sentence in 2020 and accused of spying. Now, Paul Whelan worked in corporate security, but the accusation that he was a U.S. spy in Russia is absolutely insane and asinine. Dude was unfairly targeted because he's a U.S. Marine. Let's be real, this is simply get back to when the U.S. was putting everybody in jail who they suspected to be spies of the Soviet Union. But Paul Whelan should be number one priority. Brittany Griner coming home because I guess more basketball stars care about her than they care about Paul Whelan, or that she's better at putting a ball through a hoop than Paul Whelan, to me is disgusting. This situation is sad and is absolutely wrong on all levels. One, we should not be exchanging Brittany Griner for no Lord of War. That's the first thing. The second thing is everybody else who was convicted of the exact same crime who don't got celebrity status should have been priority before Brittany Griner. And then three, if we were granting special privileges, Paul Whelan should be coming home first. The situation is sad and disgusting and is not something to celebrate at all.